it's a huge pleasure to welcome everybody and kick off an opportunity for the graduate advising community to hear and participate in a conversation with Chancellor Christ. Chancellor Christ is deeply committed to graduate education, and so I know she comes here anxious to hear your perspective. I will always say thank you when I meet with this group, because with the dispersed nature of graduate education around the Berkeley campus, you truly are the frontline people who help our graduate students with everything. You're the one-stop shop for sort of everything from tax advice, financial aid, academic aid. I know that you deal with family crises when they arise and all sorts of other things. And your dedication makes an enormous difference to our graduate students. So I thank you sincerely for that. Without further ado, though, I'm now going to turn things over to Andrea and Chancellor Christ for what I know is going to be a fascinating conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona. I just want to open by thanking all of you for coming and for contributing to the survey beforehand. I really sincerely thank you, Carol, for joining us. Your attendance yesterday was, I think many of us weren't in the room yesterday, but you did an undergrad version that was very well attended and very much appreciated. And so I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for your strategic plan, for elevating the student experience to the level of a strategic plan, and for your leadership that you've offered us so far this year. It's been a real delight. And I was saying to my colleagues in the grad division, none of us can remember, many of us have worked on campus for many years, and none of us can remember getting the opportunity to talk to a chancellor like this and to come and speak to the graduate community. There's some long-standing community members out here who probably have never had this opportunity either. So we are immensely grateful. Thank you. I also just want to thank the people that helped us get this ready. It took a lot of people to get this ready, so I want to thank Jenny Kwan and Jane Fink and Andy Sohn and Larissa Charnsangave and for all your help before, during, and after this event, and thank the School of Information for your kind use of this room. It's very much appreciated. So, as I mentioned before, in teeing up and getting ready for this event and trying to understand what we might want to spend our hour with the Chancellor talking about, I sent out a very quick survey and heard back from some of you. So I'm going to share a little bit now about what that survey revealed, and then as questions come up, I'll reveal more of what we found. But what we did is we asked you what you wanted the Chancellor to know about your life as staff, about your work as graduate advisors, and what you would ask the Chancellor if you were given the opportunity. And so we had 18 respondents, which was not a huge number, but enough to give us some really good information, none of which was a huge surprise, except some of the demographics that I wanted to share. We asked how long you've worked at Berkeley, and many of us have been doing this. Some of us in this room have been in meetings together for several decades. Belen. But Belen introduced me to, Belen and I go way back to one of my very first campus meetings, many, many moons ago. So there are some of us who are very experienced, and then what surprised me is that most of us are newer to this community. 39% of the respondents have been here 1 to 5 years. 11% are 6 to 10, and then 17 for 16 to 20 years, 17% at 20 to 25, and then this is where you'd be in, Belen, perhaps, 26 to 30 beyond are 11%. So we have a very broad demographic experience in this room, but we also have some really early career, new to Berkeley, exciting new changes in the profession and the community. So I thought it'd be worth spelling that out. So, but to move into our first question, I wanted to just jump in and ask you, maybe if you would reach back to your days. Many people in this room know that you were faculty for many years and you served as an administrator in the English department. And before you left to be the president of Smith College and then returned to us a few years ago in several roles. Could you take your mind back to when you were in a department advising grad students and how you worked with maybe the person who might have been called the graduate assistant at the time, maybe the graduate secretary? And how did you and that person perhaps ever solve a problem or improve a student's experience in a way that resonates?
Well, first I want to thank all of you for the work that you do for Berkeley. You are so important to both our departments and our graduate students. Graduate programs are the pride and joy of every department on campus, and there are so many often very complex problems that graduate students face, and you're so important in helping our graduate students navigate their way through them. This was certainly true in my experience in the English department. The graduate, I actually can't remember what her title was, whether she was the graduate secretary or the graduate advisor. I think she was the graduate secretary. It's a woman named Donna Holloway. She was extraordinary. Everybody knew her. All the graduate students knew her. All the faculty knew her. And she was the kind of node of connection in relationship to any problem that either a graduate student or a faculty member had. There was no party in the English department that Donna wasn't there at the party. And she was really a part of the community and such an organic and important part of the community. I think everyone in the English department, certainly everyone on the faculty, felt Donna was their problem solver. You had a graduate student who was having a problem setting up their qualifying exam committee, or a graduate student that needed a leave because of the illness of a parent. You would immediately go to Donna, or if Donna heard of a problem and it was one of your graduate students, Donna would immediately go to you. So I had a sense of it as a very connected and high-functioning community. That was certainly my experience when I was a faculty member.
I think you would find that remains to be the case for sure, and the profession as a whole, as Susan shared with us yesterday, has indeed professionalized and developed into a very important part of our work. So in terms of the role of the graduate advisor, which is the first thing I thought I'd like to talk about, you clearly understand how GSAOs are jacks of all trades, yes. And they are the people who hear about all aspects of a grad student's life and needs to be a resource hub for so many different types of students. And they're also, as you might remember, often the ones tasked with breaking bad news to students. Mm-hmm. Managing the details of policies and procedures, maintaining knowledge about academic, administrative, and logistical systems to maintain the work. But they often feel like they don't get to fully share in the successes and the appreciation of the work that then gets accomplished. Staff often feel blamed when things go wrong, even when it's well beyond their control to have made it go right. Someone quoted, all the responsibility but none of the authority. Somebody mentioned that staff feel squeezed, and I think all of us know this in every job family, but student advisors in particular are asked to do more as the workforce shrinks and as the student body grows. And as I'm sure you've heard Fiona mention in many meetings, we've had an 11% increase in grad students since 2013. And we'll talk a little more about the changes in those grad students when we discuss professional masters. But in terms of graduate advisors, we share a sincere commitment to our students and our departments, and many are satisfied with their roles in the department. Many of them cite students as the reason they get up in the morning and the reason they come in. However, some GSAOs report feeling underappreciated, blamed when things go wrong, and responsible for factors beyond their ability to control. How might we increase the visibility of and respect for the work of graduate advisors when communicating to faculty, students, and the public?
Well, I think that the most important sort of point of intervention is the department chair. And I said this yesterday in the conversation with undergraduate advisors. There's a new department chairs organization, a chairs council. It meets quite frequently. I can't remember what their frequency of meetings is, but I think having a conversation with that group about the issues that graduate student advisors feel are important for department chairs to know, important for department chairs to address if there are ways in which you feel departments are systematically falling short, would probably be the most effective point of intervention. Chair, I mean, when you serve as a chair, you often don't think you have that much authority, but chairs really are the most important point, intervention point, in terms of the running of the department. I know, at least in the English department, and I assume this may be true in many of the departments in which you work, that there is a graduate, a vice chair for graduate studies. And talking about that role with the chair, not so much just with your chair, but with the group of chairs should be helpful, because I certainly, in my experience in the English department, knew people who functioned in that role in a just extraordinary way, were wonderful, and others not so much. And so, you know, just having that conversation, less at a personal, this is my job, this is my department, but more elevating it to, you know, chairs as a group. It's one of the most important functions of a chair, is making sure the graduate program runs really, really well. And what are the kinds of ways in which GSO's work needs recognition? What are the best traits to look for in a vice chair for graduate study? What are a set of expectations about those relative roles? Seems to me an important kind of question, important conversation to have.
Great, thank you. Another big change at Berkeley in the last few years is the increase in professional masters, including in addition to more students, we have now become a majority master's campus. And that increase in master's programs increases the workload of all administrators and advisors on campus, because they cycle through much faster and in larger numbers. There's also an unfortunate perception among students, staff, and faculty, students, staff, and their departments, that the professional master's students are valued only for their tuition dollars. And there's an increasing perception among some of our respondents that they are feeling like they're paying a premium price for tuition, but don't feel like they are part of the community and valued for more than just their tuition. There's some perception that they aren't as integral to the department or as bright and accomplished as their doctoral colleagues. So how could we better communicate the importance of professional programs to California's future? How could we address the changes in graduate study at Berkeley and bring those students into the community and address their unique needs in an appropriate way that makes them feel welcome while continuing to serve the doctoral students that we also care so much about?
Well, first of all, let me say how important I think these programs are to Berkeley. I'm sure you are all aware that now the master's has become the new bachelor's, and that for so many professional careers, it's expected that, that people pursuing them have a professional master's degree. Master's programs are proliferating, and I think it's extraordinarily important that Berkeley offer these programs to fulfill its mission to serve the people of the state of California. In many departments and also schools, the proportion of doctoral students and master's students has shifted. And in many schools, there are many more master's students than there used to be. It is so important to serve those students well. And in this regard, I think the Haas School offers, I don't know if anybody's from the Haas School in this room, but I think the Haas School offers a real model of how to do this. I mean, the master's students are customers. They that the quality of their experience is so important for the continuing reputation of the program. These are people, for the most part, that are making a very substantial investment of their own money in this degree, and treating them well is just what we need to be responsible for as a community. I think our organization, probably at the department or school and college level, and even at the campus level, hasn't caught up to the ways in which our population has shifted. So I think this is a question actually the graduate division needs to ask itself is, are we organized in the best possible way to serve what are very different populations of students? And the master's students are resident students who are here for 2 years of resident work, but there also are many low residency programs. And so making sure that we are attending to what can be the quite different needs of those students from the needs of PhD students, where there's a kind of rhythm, often a rather leisurely rhythm to PhD study. And you have these, milestones. You've got, qualifying exam. You've got the prospectus exam. Some departments do a defense of a dissertation, and you have all of the questions related to teaching appointments. Those punctuation points and that rhythm are really not the way in which professional master's students are treated. And so it's so important, I think, for every unit to think about who are the graduate students we're serving and what do they need from us, and are we organized in the best possible way to do that?
Thank you. So our next question, a topic that came up again and again on the survey, was about the tools we use and the transactional nature, and we spent some time yesterday talking about transactional nature of advising. And so the student information system is obviously a question that people want to hear from you about. I'll just summarize for the audience some of what we heard in the survey. And just to give you a little background, Carol, many of the graduate functionalities are just starting to roll out. We are just starting to see some, just even in the last week or two, and I hear in the next week or two, we're going to start to feel like we're getting some of the functions. But let's just say for the last academic year, we operated without feeling like we had a lot of the tools we needed to do our work. There is some concern that well, let's just point out one of the issues that came up and surprised a lot of us is how many policies got impacted by the implementation of an SIS. Yes. And how there were, for instance, there used to be a sheet of paper that conducted 5 different transactions on it, and it took human beings to figure out what transaction was intended and to make it happen. And now we have a system that had to be programmed. And so that required some policy adaptations. And so it has been a difficult year, or several years, and the graduate advisors have been struggling both to maintain knowledge of the policies that are changing and the use of the tools that are changing. And so I'm just going to say the audience is a little weary. We're a little tired. I'm going to speak for you all and say we're a little tired, and still not feeling fully able to do our work in the way we know we need to be doing it. So the question is, does the campus understand the stressors placed on advising staff when our SIS isn't functional? Can the campus put more funding into finishing the project and allowing us to do our work more effectively? As one respondent said, it's close to being great, but it's not there yet.
Well, thanks for that question. I'm very aware that the implementation of SIS badly fell down in relationship to graduate study. That the there were many challenges in the implementation of SIS, but it was just quite simply inadequate in its implementation of the functionality for graduate students. I hope we're fixing that. We have employed a consultant, Deloitte, to come in and make both make an assessment and recommendations. I was just in a meeting earlier this week in which we approved the funding to increase the budget for implementation. And I'm really sorry for all of you who have struggled with a system that was just not functional for a full year. And Fiona has been a constant and passionate advocate for the functionality that wasn't there. One of the lessons that I've taken from this is SIS was a project that was governed by a committee. And I don't think that was an adequate governance mechanism. There was not a single person who was ultimately responsible for the SIS project. And in retrospect, I always try with everything that I do to ask myself the question, what went well, what could have been better, and what were the reasons for what went well and what failed. And in retrospect, I think part of the problem with SIS was that there was not a single office that was assigned responsibility and accountability for the project, but rather a rather complex governance by committee, which just finally didn't function well.
Great. Well, that's some very good news. It's very gratifying to hear.
I hope so. I mean, it's still, remains to be seen.
Okay, well, I know that the grad division, until we broke to come here today, the grad division was meeting and working and moving forward. So we are continuing to press ahead, but I just want this audience to know. And we will take questions, I promise that we're getting there. Actually, you know what? If you haven't, Mike, there's no reason why we can't go ahead and take the question if it's related to this. I'm gonna just throw it off a little bit.
Hello, Chancellor Christ. My name is Mary, and I just wanted to say a couple of things about on the committees or the consultants when they come in. It would be really lovely to have some staff able to voice get really specific about what's not working and where the frustrations lie, because sometimes I feel like our voices might not be heard at that level, and so sometimes the fixes or the things that are happening aren't always exactly matching up with our needs. That's all.
Yeah, that's certainly good advice. Thank you.
And we are going to leave plenty of time for questions, so those of you that didn't jump on the mic, hold them and we'll get them. The last formal question I have is about the strategic plan and the student experience and how graduate students will fit in that. And so I don't know how many of you have read the strategic plan draft that's still out there. I know there's still work to be done on it, but there is a draft ready and available for us to read. And many of the proposed actions include graduate education in some way, including expanding interdisciplinary graduate education, joint concurrent degrees. Yesterday we talked about how undergrads would be impacted by 3+2 and 4+1. That, of course, would impact the graduate community equally. Developing partnerships with other universities and corporate entities and stuff are all really exciting ideas that have come out of the strategic plan. Basic needs are identified as a constant concern. There's an emphasis on how we need to change the funding models for graduate education in order to acknowledge some of these professional programs that you were just talking about earlier. And then there was some concern about climate and diversity and how we make sure to keep improving our efforts on climate and diversity as we embody this new student experience plan. So the question is, how do we plan to balance the need to innovate and create new models for graduate education with the cost-cutting nature of our budget these days? How do you see graduate advising contributing to the belief that Berkeley should be as renowned for its student experience as it is for its research achievements, which of course was quoted yesterday? So I think the gist of my question is, how are we going to, or do you have any ideas yet about how we're going to embody this strategic plan while we're still trying to get our bearings as a leaner, meaner, trimmer institution?
Okay, well, let me say, I have lots to say in response to that question. I first want to talk about the things that are most important to me, both in terms of my immediate goals as they affect graduate education and in terms of the strategic plan. I think the single biggest long-term risk to Berkeley's excellence, preeminence, is its lack of student housing. And I see the impact on graduate students as already having an effect on students accepting of Berkeley's offers. Housing is simply too hard to find, too expensive, often too far from campus. And so I see the commitment that I and the campus have made to doubling our housing capacity in the next decade as absolutely critical for graduate education. These are all public-private partnerships, so they're not at all dependent on the budget of the campus. They're really fueled by private capital. It's because housing is a very good investment in the Bay Area. So that's number one. Number two, what came out very powerfully from the strategic planning process is a sense from many departments, schools and colleges across the campus that our graduate funding, fellowship support is just inadequate. Our fellowship packages are no longer competitive with those of our private peers. And again, you know, you can have the most wonderful faculty in the world, but if you can't recruit good graduate students, that's going to compromise the excellence and quality of a department. So it's essential to raise money for increased graduate student financial aid and fellowship support. We are, in 2019, we hope to move into the public phase of a comprehensive campaign. This will either be a $5 billion or $6 billion campaign. And graduate student support will be one of the most important objectives of the campaign. So that's a second thing. A third thing is I wanted to talk a bit about diversity, because diversity is one of my most important goals, increasing diversity as chancellor. And in graduate programs, there are particular challenges because graduate admissions, as you all know, are local. So you depend, unlike the undergraduate admissions, where we also face challenges. I'm not trying to say one is you know, just a wonderful model of achieving diversity and the other isn't. But in graduate admissions, they depend much more on local agency. So thinking about how we can work with departments, schools, and colleges to recruit diverse graduate student bodies is really important, and then making sure we make the connections for those graduate students among programs and also to faculty and staff across the campus that can provide a sense of community for graduate students. There are so many conversations I've had, even in the short time that I've been back in the administration, of graduate students who are, say, the only African-American graduate student in their department, and how isolating an experience that is, how much they really yearn for both mentors in terms of graduate students a little bit further up the road, but also faculty members who are can really provide both modeling and advice to being an underrepresented student in an institution that's dominated by white and Asian students. So that's an important challenge for all of us. In terms of the budget, we are making really good progress on the budget. I'm absolutely confident that we will have our budget balanced by 2020, which is the goal we've been given by the Office of the President. And already we're hitting, even though it may not feel to you like this, we're hitting a turning point where more and more of the targets that we've set have been being met by revenues than by budget cutting. There are 6 revenue categories that we're working with. First is non-degree enrollment. That's summer session, university extension, executive education. Second is self-supporting master's programs. Third is revenue from intellectual property, monetization of intellectual property. We're just as good at producing intellectual property, indeed better than Stanford, but we're not as good at monetizing it. So that's a really important piece. And graduate students are critical here. You know, if you go to any of these incubators or accelerators that now are rimming the campus, you will find lots of graduate students and postdocs really thinking about how they can move whatever their discoveries are to the next stage of capitalization. Monetization of real estate, and increase in contract and grant activity, and then finally philanthropy. But I feel very bullish on Berkeley in the long term. I think we really have turned a corner. There's another kind of hard year in front of us, but we really have gotten so much further than I certainly thought we were going to get 2 years ago when I started being engaged in this effort to balance the budget.
So I think this is a good time. We've got people with mics in the back, so please ask your questions. Carol has one up here.
Hi, Chancellor Christ. Thanks so much for being here. I'm a huge fan. And so that's really wonderful news to hear that the funding's been approved for the student information system. I was wondering how much money was approved and what are the next steps in implementing that?
How much is $5 million for this year, but we're still thinking about whether we should be accelerating that and moving some of the funding that we had anticipated dispensing in 1920 to 1819. And we're working very closely with Deloitte in order to figure that out.
Come on, questions. All right, Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Skelly. I'm with Berkeley International Office. So I'm not just a graduate advisor. I work with basically any level of international student. But I mean, our current immigration climate for international students is very difficult right now. Mm-hmm. Additionally, there are just general climate issues for them as well. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, I mean, as a particular population, you know, maybe what the big picture idea is for making, in particular, international graduate students feel valued and welcome at the university. They're another group that often feels like they have dollar signs on their heads for their value, especially since many of them are in professional programs. Mm-hmm. So just wanting to kind of touch on their special challenges and kind of what you view from your perspective as being a way that we can continue to make Berkeley a place that these students feel welcome and want to come and spend their graduate experience.
Yeah, certainly what I hear from faculty is how much they value international graduate students. I have many faculty tell me how motivated they are, how brilliant they are. I mean, they're a population of enormous value to many, many department schools and colleges. I am a huge fan of iHouse, and I wish that iHouse had taken on itself an even larger function. or objective to be a place for community, not just for its residents, but for international graduate students in particular, because I think that that's a place where the whole culture of it is we value international students. I think there are things that we could be doing as a campus differently. And thank you for reminding me that international graduate students are just an important piece of that to celebrate. But I think one of the difficulties, of course, is our national political climate. So even if nothing bad happens on the Berkeley campus and everybody is really excited to have international graduate students here, it's hard to read the newspapers.
With the election this fall and a change in the governorship, is there any sort of expectation that funding from the state will change at all to the UC system, or is this kind of something that's never going to change?
It's a really good question. It's one that I spend a lot of time both thinking about and looking at the tea leaves about. I think if Gavin Newsom wins the election, he will be more supportive of funding of the University of California than Governor Brown has been. And I anticipate that he's the candidate who goes into the campaign with a stronger support. That said, and we have good news from the state this year. It's not as good as we hoped, in the sense that we have a tuition buyout for in-state students, but it's in one-time money, not permanent dollars, which is really unfortunate. But we at least have the one-time buyout. And we also have money for the new enrollment we've already taken, and money for deferred maintenance, which is incredibly important. So that is good news. The legislature was holding back $50 million. Contingent on the Office of the President meeting a set of conditions that were specified as a result of the audit process it went through. And that $50 million has been released. That's very, very good news. I understand that the budget will be signed by Jerry Brown that is currently proposed. So it's good news that we'll probably have a budget fairly soon. That said, the fiscal conditions in the state are challenging. I don't expect there ever to be a day when we go back to a very, very low-cost university education for California students. I just don't see the possibility in the structure of state finances as I understand them. I think we've made a lot of progress this semester in lobbying efforts with the legislature. All of the campuses have been spending a lot of time in Sacramento. I've been spending a lot of time in Sacramento, and I think that the legislature is beginning to understand the value and urgency of funding UC. And our students have been helping a huge amount, I have to say, in that lobbying effort. That has to continue. We can't stop doing that, because any legislator is continually besieged by all kinds of requests for support, and we have to constantly be there. The biggest opportunity for some substantial change in financing for post-secondary education in the state of California is a proposition that we hope will be on the ballot in the 2020 election, which will roll back the restrictions of Proposition 13 for commercial properties. That will create a very substantial new source of funding if it passes. Of course, corporations are really going to fight this. So that will be a very, very significant proposition campaign for the 2020 ballot.
Jane Boleyn had a question. Oh, Rumi, your turn.
Chancellor Christ, Harumi from Psychology. Thanks so much for being here today. A question I had was, how can the administration influence our faculty populations, maybe in terms of helping them better understand what students need and how staff can support them, and how on certain occasions faculty have to get some stuff done. I noticed that a lot of times staff are put in situations where they're creating a lot of bureaucracy because a faculty member might just not be able to get something done. And we understand everyone's in a squeeze. They're working on grants, they're working on their research, they're mentoring grad students, but sometimes those minor administrative details that they don't take care of are what cause the rest of us to put in a lot more time and effort to fix problems on the back end. And so one of the things I noticed was when the sexual harassment prevention went online, and all staff and faculty were told, if you don't take this, if you don't complete this, you will not be eligible for merits. Is there some way to link merits with some of the other tasks that are critical to both graduate and undergraduate education in terms of the administrative pieces or roles that faculty hold?
Yeah, again, I think the leadership of the department chair is really critical. So Ben Hermelin, who's the vice provost for academic personnel, is really focused on something that he calls negative service. In other words, I'm sure there is probably at least one in every department, the faculty member who never fulfills the kind of routine obligations that make it hard for their students, makes it hard for everybody in the department to do their work efficiently because they just don't do enough stuff, or something that's not talked about enough, faculty bullying, and so are we going to withhold faculty merits because their faculty member hasn't completed their sexual harassment online training? Probably not. But if there's a pattern, that pattern is best addressed by the department chair, by the power of persuasion that I know department chairs have, saying this is what we have to do and this is why we're going to do it.
Sometimes department chairs, because they cycle off, they don't necessarily, even if they are right there with you and saying like, yes, this is wrong, and they're following up, they also oftentimes don't feel like they have the authority and know that they're going to cycle out. And who knows, that other person might become the chair. So is there a way that the administration can maybe work with faculty to put in place steps that make it a little bit more?
Well, you're talking about sticks, and I often think carrots work better. But I think that one of the things we need to do is even more leadership training with department chairs. The department is, in my view, the most important level of authority in the university. Everything significant happens at the department level. And so that chair position, even if you're chair for just 3 years, you have to have a sense that this is a position in which you're going to make a difference, and you have to be willing to take on some of the hard issues, which are almost always people issues in your department.
We have a question over here. I'm sorry to put that on. Okay. Are graduate group chairs included in that organization? Because I'm not my programs aren't associated.
That's a really good question, and well, I have to talk about. I don't think that graduate group chairs are involved in chair orientation.
Can I just respond just so that we can finish that thought?
No, the graduate group chairs don't sort of report into a sort of a department chair as such. When there are challenges within graduate groups, we trust that the process of reviews of those graduate groups will surface issues, but it is one of my concerns. And, you know, I actually do get bothered by kind of proliferations of graduate groups, because I think that the kind of stability and the sort of hierarchy that one has in a department chair, in a department, is actually a very good environment for safeguarding the students. And I do worry about students in graduate groups, and I think that they aren't necessarily always as well taken care of.
Good afternoon, Chancellor Christ, Heather Iwata from the Department of Economics. I have a question, speaking about carrots, money for faculty in particular. So in exploring the self-supporting master's programs on a campus like Berkeley's, where you have very esteemed faculty who are a part of our departments, and costly, quite frankly, as well, in exploring the master's programs and trying to find faculty to potentially support that master's program, make it appealing for prospective master's students, but in addition to not taking away from current PhD students, and part of the appeal to attending Berkeley is to work with these faculty. What are your thoughts about perhaps, helping to catapult this goal of increasing these master's programs, but also sort of putting the money behind it too, to help make it a bit more competitive and appealing to master's students without the cost of taking away from PhD students?
That's a great question. My view toward it is that departments should treat these programs as a way of making the pie bigger for everybody. So this is a place where the Haas School, I think, has acted particularly effectively. Law schools also done this well, where if you develop a master's program where you have, I mean, obviously this takes several years, but where you have a reliable and robust income stream, you can hire faculty off of that income stream. Engineering is doing this. And so department, don't see any reason not to be specific, like economics, that really wants more faculty. This is a great way of getting more faculty. And so and the other thing is that we have pretty substantial reserves, not at the center, but out in the units. And one of the ways which we can use those reserves is they're called below-the-line investments. The term isn't really important, but it essentially means that if you have a plan for something that will create more revenue for your department, you can use those reserves for these below-the-line investments. That's the startup funding that will enable you to create a program for which I know in economics there's a great market demand for masters in economics.
Right. Yeah, and then I think as a follow-up to that is, at what point does that make? There you go. But at what point I hear what you're saying, and I'm understanding as we're going through our conversations and exploring that. But I believe, though, that the level of revenue that the program would potentially gain would be like 5 years down the line at a cost, perhaps. So what would be the actual line of revenue where we could potentially dip into?
Well, that's what you have to explore, is where the reserves are held. That might be the possible resources to start that. Another possibility is we've just started 2 programs, both joint with the Haas School of Business. The B squared program or the double B program? It's biology and business, and then the ME. I think it's the MET program. It's a joint business and engineering degree. substantial philanthropic investment in the startup for those programs. One of the things that has happened is that many of our donors have a rather different attitude toward philanthropy than certainly the attitude that I was used to in the 90s, where I love Berkeley, here's a wonderful gift. What I'm seeing much more on the part of donors is, I want to see this result at Berkeley, and so I'm going to invest in this. And so maybe there's a donor that would love to see this program created in economics and say, I'm going to invest this sum of money to see the department, to seed the development of this program. So there are two fund sources. Reserves, which are held in various parts of the campus, but also donor funding.
Hi, my name's Erin Blanton, and I'm in the Department of Statistics, and sort of on par with economics. We've had a professional master's program for many years, and unlike engineering and unlike Haas, we're a department, we're not a college.
Yeah.
So it's a much smaller population. So when you're saying hiring faculty members to make the students feel invested, because I actually see these students as future donors. You know, these are students
absolutely.
who are going into industry. So if they feel like, oh my gosh, look at this amazing thing that I got because I was at UC Berkeley. This master's allowed me to have this wonderful career had I not gotten this. But if they don't feel like the department, and for a lot of students, I'm the person that they think, that's who helped me.
Yeah.
And they want the faculty, and I want the faculty to also be a part of that, because, you know, they're the ones who, when they give, they're like, I remember that faculty member made such an impact on my education. And when it's one faculty member for, 50 students, they're getting spread pretty thin, because if they're doing research and writing grants, and then there's 50 master's students. So I like the idea of hiring faculty, but when you're a single department, you might not be able to have the robust faculty resources that a college can when they have 500 professional master's students. So I know talking to having the chair talk to them, but I think it's I guess, what are your recommendations for sort of almost having a cultural shift in faculty's perspective of master's students? They might not have the research investment that these PhD students, but they might be those donors that in 10 years, they're, a vice president of something, and they want to give to us because look what we were able to do for them. And they remember, oh, that professor is still there, still working with those master's students, and I want to invest in them and their future.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you mention the phrase cultural shift, because that's what I think has to happen at Berkeley. For so many decades, we've been generously supported by the state. And as we've gone through this period of budgetary challenges, it is so easy for faculty to say, well, we should be doing things exactly as we always have. This is so valuable, the model that we had. And Carol, if you only went to Sacramento and talked more eloquently, of course the state would give us the money. That's not going to happen. And we have to become a unique kind of public-private hybrid. I'm actually really amused by the phrase self-supporting master's programs, because if you spent any time in a private college or university, every program is a self-supporting program. That's the way it has to be. And so I think just shifting, an early question you asked, Andrea, about, these programs are here just to make money as opposed to teach people, that to me is a really artificial opposition. And that we have to think of every student here as a student who not only contributes what he or she brings in his or her time on campus, but also will contribute to the campus moving forward. I just made a trip to Boston the beginning of this week, and met with various groups of alumni in Boston. Almost every one of them was a graduate alumnus or alumna. It being Boston, these were MIT and Harvard folks mostly. And we just have to think about have a different attitude about how we invest in students. And it's not just, I'm making it sound kind of mercenary, I guess, but that you really need to create a sense of bond between students and their institutions that will continue in multiple ways over decades. So yes, I agree with what you're saying. And working with your dean in terms of the department problem is the most important. I guess we have one more question, and then it's really time.
I'm Mark from the Haas School, and so following along on your discussion of the change in the culture among the faculty, is there a way that we could also change the culture, at least the accounting for how state support is accounted for? And the reason that I say this is when we at the Haas School look to do partnerships with other campus partners, the degree to which any program is supported by the state limits the kind of partnerships that we can engage in. So
yeah, that's a really good question, and the answer to it is complicated, and I'm going to answer it rather simply. We have, I'm just in the process of appointing a finance reform committee because we have a financial system that was designed to fit the old, it's all state funding. And now we have so many different fund sources, and every single program has its own special arrangement, a special deal. And we have to create a set of both incentives and a sense of how revenue gets split that is a set of rules everybody understands and makes those partnerships easy.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank again my collaborators that helped put on this event. Thank you, colleagues and friends, for coming and for being so open with your questions. And many sincere thanks to you, Carol, for your presence here and for your optimistic leadership.